On your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, Canada takes down Slovenia 100-89 to advance to the semifinals of the FIBA World Cup. And Nick Angstadt of Locked On Mavs, aka Locked On Slovenia, is here to break it all down. Let's get to it on today's show.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, September the 6th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can follow my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. And you can always join the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description. Come hang out. It's a lovely little family we got building around the show. Fantasy basketball league starting up, maybe multiple leagues depending on who's in. We got lots of great stuff, and the season is drawing near. You're going to want to be in there. It's been fun talking about the Canada games in the Discord. Come hang out on Friday morning, 4:45 a.m. if you want to be there, as Canada has beaten Slovenia and is now moving on to the semifinals. They will play for a medal at the very least at the World Cup. And on today's show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On, make every moment more. New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's show, we are digging into the game against Slovenia with Locked On Mavericks, aka Locked On Slovenia host Nick Angstadt. We jumped on the horn right after the game, talked about our big takeaways. Luka Dončić getting ejected for complaining about calls. That was fun. Dillon Brooks getting ejected for being too damn cool and too damn much for Slovenia to handle. Also pretty fun. Didn't end up hurting them in the end. Let's get to it. The conversation with Nick Angstadt, a little crossover action here, talking Canada-Slovenia as Canada preps for the semifinals against Serbia on Friday morning. But without further ado, let's get to it. Myself and Nick talking Canada-Slovenia.
And joining me here, and I'm joining him there, host of Locked On Raptors. What you got for me, Sean Woodley?
I got a semifinal appearance for the beloved Canadian national team. Locked On Raptors is just Locked On Canada right now because the Raptors are a drag to talk about at the present time. So thrilled to be watching some really exciting, fun basketball. And man, this was like the best of both worlds for me, this game, because the first half was just like really fun, great FIBA basketball, 50-50. I think it was tied at the half. Beautiful stuff. And then Canada completely blows out Slovenia in the second half. It was beautiful. Like all the boxes checked of what I'm looking for in morning September basketball.
Does Canada or the Toronto Raptors have more NBA players on it?
Okay, now, well, Malachi Flynn is on the Raptors, so that's one non-NBA player. I guess you could say like present day Thad Young is kind of on the fringe. I'll give the edge to Canada or to the Raptors, but just by a smidge, considering Canada has literally a college player on the team right now.
Well, that's very true with Zach Edey. But considering that the NBA team would have more NBA players on it, depends on your definition of what an NBA player is at that point. But all right, today we're going to talk about FIBA. We're going to talk about Canada versus Slovenia. We set this up before this game and wanted to do a crossover because Sean Woodley covers the Toronto Raptors and obviously Canada and Canada basketball. We've got Dwight Powell and Luka Dončić obviously on Slovenia. We've been covering all the Slovenia games over on Locked On Mavericks. Those now come to an abrupt end here.
Well, you're not going to do the consolation games, the battle for fifth place and not an Olympic berth?
We'll see if Luka does it. He's been dealing with some injuries here and there. He had the elbow thing again. I call them Luka boo-boos because they're not really real injuries. He just kind of like comes up hurt and then he just plays well the rest of the game. And you're like, okay, well, this didn't really matter. But all right, we got to start here. Luka Dončić gets ejected in the third quarter or late in the fourth quarter of this game. About 6.5 minutes left in this game. Dillon Brooks, about almost exactly 30 seconds before that, was also ejected in this game. The story of this game coming out of it is going to be Luka's emotional intelligence, Luka's arguing with the refs, what the refs did in this game. And I think that's what it was. Slovenia came into this game with an 8.5 point underdog, according to FanDuel. They have way less NBA players. This Canada team should be much better. And so if there's any talk of, well, Slovenia, really bad showing from them. They should have been much better. It's not necessarily the case in this one, but
No.
Slovenia was tied. It was tied 50-50 at halftime, like you said. And then the third quarter, Canada just really took over. Slovenia got really distracted from, bad calls and things like that. It really got in their heads. It's a thing that we've seen from Luka teams since his second year in the NBA, when he really took over the team. Like, the team takes on that type of mentality. It hurt them in this one. It wasn't the only thing that hurt them in this one, but Canada really taking over was what did it in the third quarter.
Yeah, I mean, for me, so Canada with FIBA has been a long and arduous road. For those who are not familiar, for those in Slovenia just tuning in, kind of what's the deal with this Canada team? Like, it's been tough, right? Like, they just qualified for the Olympics for the first time since 2000 by beating Spain in the last game of the group stage. In between there have been a lot of really just gross disappointments. A last chance tournament winner go home game against the Czechs back in 2021 in Canada, mind you, and they lose that, and it was a total disaster. They lost a game against a NBA playerless Venezuela back in 2015 in Mexico to not make the Olympics in 2016. It's just been a really long road. And I think the biggest challenge for Canada over the course of that time has been kind of adapting to the FIBA style of play. Their athleticism is undeniable. They obviously have the talent to outstrip most of these rosters with NBA players up and down, but the FIBA style has always been kind of a challenge. And I think what we saw specifically in the third quarter was the sort of marrying of Canada's elite athleticism and just like general overall talent with the sort of guile to play the FIBA style. And it led to, what was it, like a 17-5 run to open the third quarter after that very tight first half. Slovenia slows down a little bit. They still shot 15 of 31 from three in this game. It's pretty nuts. And that was why they were able to kind of hang in it. But this was another example of Canada kind of figuring out the FIBA style. Jordi Fernandez, new coach, is obviously, really kind of instilled a really great sort of cohesive energy into this team. And I think it ultimately all flows from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's incredible, who is the star player who doesn't go whine all the time. Can't relate to having a non-whiny best player on my team, but he was unbelievable. 31 points in this one, gets to the line, goes 14 of 16 from the line in this one.
How many?
10 boards, 4 assists.
Hold on, wait, what'd you say? How many?
14 to 16. You should stop fouling Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
16.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice to have a nice whistle at times in this game. And
if I were Slovenia, I would practice more discipline and just like sound fundamental defense. But that's just me.
Luka took himself out of the game with the complaining to the refs. The calls were egregious. It was so.
They're always egregious in FIBA, though. Like, I'm abstaining from ref talk. This is like a rule I have on my podcast. I know the Mavs contingent always has to talk about refs because Luka is Luka, but I'm abstaining from ref complaints.
You want me to go full screen? I'll just take you out of this one for a second as I do it. The calls were bad. Like, you look at this game and you tried to call it as you're watching it, and the calls that even early on, the calls that SGA was getting was not the same way that Luka was getting calls. Luka is 6'8". He's huge. He gets hit on every play. It's almost like, he gets a Shaq effect almost, where there's just going to be contact. He initiates a lot of contact too. And so if there's going to be contact, he wants the same types of fouls, and he's not going to get the same types of fouls that an SGA, who is just like long, wiry, like a slinky, like I think, who was it? Caitlin Cooper, somebody called him like a slinky playing basketball out there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Is what he is. And you're just not going to get those same sort of touch fouls that SGA was getting. And so Luka just looks at those two things and says, well, this is not making any sense. Whines, complains about it, gets called for a tech, and then looks at his coach and starts complaining to his coach that he's got to put more pressure on the. It's like, if it can't be me, it's got to be somebody. So he puts pressure on his.
Someone
coach.
Must scream at this official. Someone has to do it.
To then put pressure to try and equal out the fouls in this game, and it just wasn't going to happen at any point. And these FIBA refs, even more so than the NBA, I think, they don't get shown up. And what these FIBA refs also have done in all these games I've watched all of Canada, I've watched all of Australia, I've watched all of Slovenia now, is they take the collective and charge individual players for the collective. So like Gregor Horvat gets called for a tech in the fourth quarter when like Luka had been the one complaining, the coach had been the one complaining, and he complains about one call and they're like, nope, technical foul on you. And he gets ejected from the game at that point. And so Like, it's just a different style. But I also think that for all that can be said about Luka's whining and complaining, yes, that, the calls were not equal on each side. Yes, the calls were, seemed to be lopsided. He's got to stay engaged in the game and not engaged
especially when you know you're your team's best hope of having a chance in a game you're trailing, right? Like, I know Slovenia kind of went on a bit of a comeback after he got ejected. Ewing theory, anybody? But
disagree.
you have to kind of know the spot. You have to know this is part of FIBA. This is what I was talking about with Canada. Is like part of dealing with the FIBA game is knowing that the refs are going to be pretty strict. It's going to be kind of wild in terms of there are going to be stretches of games where you feel like the whistle's totally against you. That's just all part of the FIBA experience. And it seems, again, like Canada's kind of figured that out, and it's a long time coming. I'm very glad it's kind of happened, but that's part of the deal here.
It's just such a mind F experience when you think of well, you know what? It's just gonna be unfair, and that just doesn't work in Luka's brain at this stage in his career, this stage in his life. Like, hey, just deal with it. It's just gonna be unfair. It just doesn't work for him at this point, and he's got to at least accept, or at least be able to push past some of that and be able to push past and say, well, I've got to stay in this game. I've got to be better at staying in the, staying in the game, of not letting the refs get to me. And honestly, of just not letting the refs take him out of individual plays, the individual plays where he's the one that is not getting back on defense, and then his teammates take on the same persona. It was a really big issue in this game. You can blame the refs all you want. You can blame Luka. I think there's enough blame to go around for a loss like this. But coming up, let's talk about how this game was actually won. How did Canada win this game? How did Slovenia even stay in this game? We'll talk about all that and more coming up. But before we do, let me tell you about FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook has you covered with all kinds of odds and lines. Take your first swing at betting MLB with FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets. You can get that right now on FanDuel Sportsbook. They have FIBA, so if you're interested in any kind of Canada action, Sean, going forward in this one.
Canada, Serbia, 4:45 a.m. on Friday. Let's go.
They don't have that up just yet on here, but they do have Italy, Latvia. Latvia is a 1.5 point favorite. That one's interesting. USA, Germany. That's going to be a good game. Germany's been really good. Obviously, Team USA. Team USA is a 10.5 point favorite in that one. So if you're feeling Germany, if you're out there like, you're a lingering Dirk fan that's listening to Locked On Mavs from Germany.
Dennis Schroeder, Raptors fans, baby. He's our great hope, filling in for Fred VanVleet. He's all we got.
Or if you're a Raptors fan, Dennis Schroeder, you can get Germany plus 10.5 on that one. Even if they lose by 8, you still win that one. So check it out. Again, go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us on Locked On Mavs, Locked On Raptors, being part of the show, part of the Everydayer crew. We appreciate you for listening. All right, Sean, let's talk about how this game was won. We talked a little bit at the top about that third quarter. They were 50-50 through the first half, which is kind of wild. I don't know if I can't remember the last game I've seen that was actually 50-50. Like it felt like it was tied and 50-50, and it was.
It's like the fake score drawn up, like written in a book by someone who's never really played or watched basketball, just like making up. That sounds like a basketball score, sure.
It's like a game is going on in the background of like a sitcom or something, like tied 50-50 at halftime. At the end of the second quarter, Slovenia started going small with about 5. I guess it's the middle of the second quarter, 5 minutes left. Slovenia went small. We had not seen that very often. And so, the Raptors really had, or not the Raptors, Canada really had.
Don't worry, I do that all the time as well.
Canada, I do it with the Mavericks and Slovenia too. Canada hadn't done that very often either. They've gone one big with Dwight or with Kelly Olynyk, but I haven't seen them go small very often. And that both teams went there. And Canada went on an 8-0 run at that point. Luka got called for a tech. It was his second foul. It looked like a real turning point. And then Slovenia ended up just holding strong and getting it tied 50-50 by halftime.
Yeah, like them going small, that was an interesting look. I think it made sense in this matchup specifically against Slovenia, just because I think Canada probably has more players than any other team in the tournament to just throw at Luka Dončić, who you're comfortable with on a switch. And we saw early in this game, Dwight Powell, your boy, was getting switched on to Luka quite a bit, and that was causing a lot of problems. They had to overhelp. Prepelic was going off for threes. Everyone on Slovenia was banging in threes to start this game, but a lot of it was because they were kind of forcing that switch of Powell onto Dončić, and that was leading to all sorts of bad stuff on the back end of possessions when help came. You go to RJ Barrett or Dillon Brooks, whoever you pick as the 5, and you can just switch across the board. And, sure, you probably don't want Shai Gilgeous-Alexander guarding Luka Dončić all the time on switches, but it seemed like they were really hunting Lou Dort for some reason. Like, very good, stout defender, but they kept on getting that switch, and it was working just fine for Canada. And I think that was a pretty interesting tactical maneuver, although it's not really what blew this game open. You mentioned, Slovenia came back and tied it up before the half. Where this game really got out of control for Slovenia was in the third quarter when Kelly Olynyk was on the floor. They went with their 2 big lineup with Olynyk and Powell. Olynyk was a plus 27 in this game. Yeah. Really nice to see after he was
in 23 minutes.
Yeah, and he was not so good in the Spain game. He kind of got bludgeoned by Willy Hernan-Gomez, which is a thing to say. Bludgeoned by Willy Hernan-Gomez in 2023. Unbelievable.
Not even Bo Cruz. Not even Juancho. Not even Bo Cruz. Willy, the other one.
But I think, in that third quarter, Nick, Canada's transition game got going. I think a big part of this was Luka not getting back for defense after complaining about calls. And you saw RJ Barrett kind of get it and running. He had a massive game, 24 on 8 of 16 shooting. And it really was, I think, the athleticism that was on display in that third quarter as they got out and running that really kind of showed the difference between these two squads. And as much as I thought that was a smart move by Jordi Fernandez to go small in the second quarter, it did feel like that third quarter, the overwhelming nature of Canada against Slovenia's athletes is really what drove this one in Canada's favor.
It felt like, and we've felt this several times, it felt like every single athlete, or at least in the starting lineup for Canada, was better than Slovenia's athletes. And that's been the case in a lot of these FIBA games, is that Slovenia just doesn't have the athletes. They don't have the NBA talent. They don't even have the EuroLeague talent compared to this. I mean, they have Luka as the one, obviously top 5 player in the world, which is a good advantage. But then outside of that, Vlatko Čančar is supposed to be on this team. He got hurt early in this FIBA, run. He's an NBA player for the Nuggets, and so he's not in there. Jakub Blažić was supposed to be a starter for this team, and then he got injured early in this run as well. And so he came back in this one and was, didn't look as good as he had been. They just don't have the talent to hang with some of these teams. And so what they can do, though, is they can hit threes. There's so many guys on this team that can hit a 3, and they had to hit really well. And they hit 15 of 31, like you said, 48%, which is a crazy mark. That's what they had to do to stay in this game. And if there's going to be any other disadvantage in Slovenia, and obviously Luka felt like the refs and the calls they were getting was a disadvantage. If there's going to be any other disadvantage like that, it was hard to see how they were going to come out of this game, because their plan against Canada was, all right, we're going to let SGA try and cook one-on-one and just let him get his, and we're going to let some of these shooters try to beat us too. We'll let RJ Barrett take how many shots? 6 threes, 16 shots, 16 shots. A lot of 8 of his makes, I felt like maybe 4 or 5 of them were just layups at the rim because he's more athletic and quicker than everybody else. We're going to let Lou Dort take some threes. We're going to let Dillon Brooks take the shots and try and let one of those wild card scorers take Canada out of the game. That felt like their one play that they tried to do.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of have to play a souped-up version of Latvia, right? Latvia obviously doesn't have Luka, pretty notable distinction, but Latvia's whole thing was,
it's pretty close.
It's we're kind of outgunned talent-wise, but we can bomb away from 3 and play the variance game. And in a single elimination game, you could do a lot worse than playing the variance game when you have legitimate, credible shooters on your roster. I know Slovenia came into this game as the 9th best team in terms of overall 3-point percentage in this tournament. They were first in 3-point volume. They put them up. And, Canada, I think, this was the thing in the first half. You could look at it and say, wow, Canada's the favorite. It's tied 50-50. I didn't think Canada did anything in the first half that was notably bad. I think, Slovenia was just banging in triples, and there was
10
not
of
much
17
you could do
from
about
3.
It. Exactly, right? And so I was
like,
you probably don't have to change up the formula too much here. Do what you've done through the first half, and variance will ultimately kind of kick in here, and that's exactly what happened.
Then we get to that third quarter, and that's really where Canada went on that run. From the 8:50 mark to the 4:20 mark in the third quarter, Canada went on a 17-3 run.
Yeah,
where it was the height of Slovenia keeps complaining about calls. They're not getting back in transition. They're turnover, bad turnovers, things like that. It just really started falling apart for them at that point. And Luka wasn't hitting at the rim at times.
No.
And he was getting to the rim. He was getting to his spot, but he wasn't finishing around the rim. He's been dealing with a left thigh injury. It didn't seem like it bothered him too much in this game, but you think about that. He had the elbow thing early in the first half that he had been dealing with as well, but there's no complaints about that. He hits a step back three with 44 seconds left in the third quarter, and you're like, oh, okay. He's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, that third quarter run is really where Canada separated themselves, and it was because they're athletes. It's hard to play against a team with Lou Dort, Dylan Brooks, SGA, RJ Barrett, like those as your wing defenders, especially if you can put all four of them out at the same time like they were doing. That changes a game for a team like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Canada got a couple of really good contributions. Like Nikhil Alexander-Walker was awesome off the bench in this game. He goes 5 of 8, 3 of 6 from deep. He's been really, really good for the most part in this tournament. A couple of duds, but for the most part been the real spark plug off the bench here. And shout out Dylan Brooks, man. He's been awesome in the last couple of games for Canada. Had a lot of foul trouble throughout this tournament, and that's the kind of the risk you run at all times with Dylan Brooks. He had 4 fouls in this game before getting ejected. It's just kind of the deal with him, especially in FIBA where you have the one fewer foul to work with. But he had 3 of his 5 threes. He's been such this is actually a thing that's really stood out to me about this Canada team is, yes, SGA is this incredible kind of head of the snake, but they have a lot of dudes who can make plays on the catch and sort of secondary actions, right? Dylan Brooks can go make something happen. Even Lou Dort, his handle is wild. It is like a total disaster. But once he gets cooking and gets downhill, he can make stuff happen. We know RJ Barrett can do it. And Nikhil Alexander-Walker is another. There's just a lot of options here. And so you get the ball out of Shai's hands, great. There's other guys who can really punish you, and that was really on display in this game. Shai only took 12 shots from the field in this game. He racked up the points from the line, obviously, but this was not a game where Shai had to just completely overtake everything. It was a very sort of by committee effort for the top Canadians, and I think it speaks to the value of having those extra dudes who can kind of make stuff happen on the second side.
Coming up, let's share some notes on other things that we saw in this game, other observations, and then let's talk about what's next for Canada and Slovenia in this FIBA run. We'll talk about all that coming up. All right, Sean Woodley, Locked On Mavs, Locked On Raptors, crossover, Team Canada, neither of us are really covering the team that we actually cover if you think about it.
Do you want to talk about the Raptors right now? I certainly don't. Wake me when they have a roster that makes some sense.
And to you, do you want to talk about Kyrie Irving?
Boy, am I glad that I'm not in your chair, because that would be a nightmare.
Coming up tomorrow on Locked On Mavs, we talk all about Kyrie Irving, and Sean Woodley does not have to be there to do it. Any other notes, things that you noticed in this game? I guess I'll note that Slovenia did play small a little bit. Mike Tobey only played 23 minutes in this one. You had D-Metz played 10 minutes, which is about normal for him. So they played almost 10 minutes without a center, or eight minutes, I guess, without a center in a 40-minute game. That was kind of notable to me. We really hadn't seen that at all for Slovenia. And it was interesting to see that Mike Tobey not get a ton of run. I guess they're scared of Kelly Olynyk, but they really wanted
everyone's scared of Kelly Olynyk. He's a monster.
They really wanted to just spread the floor and get as many 3-point shooters out there as possible. And they also had to have guys that could keep up with switching on some of these Canada athletes if they had to switch at any given point. So that was interesting to me. Anything on Canada's side that you found interesting?
I mean, I think for me, we talked about them going small, and we did see a little stretch of the game where Kyle Alexander got run for them as their sort of backup 5. Kyle Alexander, not an NBA guy. He's kicked around, I think, the G League. He's been the Canadian Elite Basketball League, played overseas and all that. He is probably their most athletic big man as far as like traditional bigs go. I'd still probably rather just have RJ Barrett or Dylan Brooks fill at the 5.
That is
but
Dwight Powell erasure right there. That is just...
And look, I love Dwight Powell, a really good FIBA player, but we've seen the limitations for him a little bit in this tournament. Offensively, he's just not really packing all that much of a punch. And Kelly Olynyk's been hitting some threes here and there, but when he's not been on, like I think the weakness for this Canada team has and always will be until they kind of develop some more bigs has been the front court, right? And I do think it's interesting to see what's going to happen when they play against Serbia. Obviously, a bruising, nasty team. Nikola Jovic has been really good. I would expect, an Olynyk or a Powell to be able to match up just fine with Jovic. And frankly, I think Canada is probably breathing kind of easier knowing that they don't have to go and bang with Jonas Valanciunas in a semifinal for Lithuania after they bowed out against Serbia. But that is going to continue to be the question. We were even kicking around in the Locked On Raptors Discord during this game thinking about, like, who are the bigs on the Olympic team next year for Canada? Of course, they've qualified, but like, who is the best big in Canada? It might be Brandon Clark, who's going to like miss the whole year with an Achilles injury. That's kind of a little interesting thing to keep an eye on. Does Zach Edey develop enough over the next year to be like a regular staple on that team and just makes the team because he's large? We'll see. But that continues to be, ever since Tristan Thompson's kind of decline kicked in, they haven't really had a go-to big man they can really trust at all times. Obviously, Olynyk has been really good for them in FIBA, but there's an extent to which he can be effective against certain matchups. We saw him get benched in the Spain game, for example, and so maybe it doesn't come back to hurt them in the Serbia game, but if they make it to the final and they're up against either Germany, obviously the States with the loaded front court they're going to have, can they hang there? That's going to be, I think, the big sort of determining factor here for Canada's success, not just now, but through the rest of this golden era that they seem to be kind of moving themselves into here. Now that they have all these commitments from the nationals, from the Canadian guys across the board, none of them notably are really reliable, good centers just yet.
Next for Slovenia, they play a consolation game, I guess.
2 consolation games. You got to play for 5th place, baby. FIBA ranking points are huge.
They'll technically, on the schedule here, they play tomorrow. They play Thursday against Lithuania, and so there's that game. We'll see if Luka plays in that game. It's a back-to-back. That'll be interesting. I think he'll play just because he's a crazy person, and he loves playing for Slovenia, and like you said, FIBA points and all that. And so they play that game, and then they'll play another game Sunday, it looks like, to try and figure out who's gonna come in, the next places, like you said. For Canada, though, much more interesting. They move on and play against Serbia, the nasty Serbia, as you've coined them. They play them on Friday, and then Team USA plays Germany, and then whoever wins between those two will face off in the finals. How are you feeling about Serbia?
I mean, probably the most worried I've been about a Team Canada opponent so far. I mean, the Spain game was its own thing because of the stakes involved there with the Olympic bid on the line. By the way, Slovenia, with this loss, has to go to a last chance tournament to qualify for the Olympics next summer. That's a thing. I have lived the last chance tournament life. It sucks. I hate it. I do not wish it upon my worst enemy. And so have fun with that next summer. I'm sure Luka will give them a pretty decent shot of coming out of whatever tournament they get plopped into, but you don't want to be doing that in the lead up to the Olympics, no doubt. With Canada, though, yeah, like Serbia, it's going to be a tough matchup. I still think Canada on overall talent is the number 2 team in this field behind the States. And I think you could honestly make an argument that they are closer to the States than you might give them credit for. Obviously, the States don't have their A team, and they have a very good squad. They've played very well. They have a massive point differential, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the best player left in this tournament with Luka going out. I don't think that's even really a question. Nope. He's seemingly the clear MVP favorite for the tournament now at this point, too, and that's going to give them a real puncher's chance. Like, they have the best closer on the board left. Bogdan Bogdanovic has been awesome for Serbia. That Serbia team, like Filip Petrusev's been really awesome. Jovic has really looked good. Maybe making that Dame Lillard trade more likely to happen or less likely. I don't know that. Maybe that's just never happening.
Neither likely.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a super fun matchup, a really good test for Canada. And there's sort of, as I mentioned off the top, they're the sort of ability to match the FIBA brand of basketball and play within it. This will be probably the ultimate test of that before they get to hopefully an eventual final against Germany or the States. I'm really looking forward to it. I will be up at 4:45 a.m. on Friday to watch it. You can bet that. But yeah, like, can we play it later? Like, what? Why is this the schedule? That's fine. I guess the States get the primetime slot. Whatever. Even though Canada is more entertaining and has the best player, if you want to, TV execs out there, if you want to flip flop the schedule, I will not complain.
It's like a 4 p.m. local time game too. Like we really have to be playing games in like the mid afternoon over there in Manila. Yeah. So then Canada, Serbia, that game will be interesting. We have USA, Germany, and then the winner, and then in FIBA will come out of these four. It's fascinating to see. Any other thoughts about Team Canada, Slovenia? Anything else with these two teams? It's been, I guess I'll do should I do the the funeral for Slovenia now?
Yeah, do the Slovenia funeral. We got plenty of Canada to talk about still, as they are still alive. But yeah, go do the funeral before the consolation games, which I think is sacrilege because the consolation games are so important. It matters so much. But yes, please do the obituary.
We'll see if they matter if Luka actually plays or not. This Slovenia team was one of their most undermanned teams they've had in a while. And so coming into this tournament, I didn't have a ton of faith in this group. They needed to just hit a ton of threes. Luka had to be really, really good, really fresh. I was really interested to see how Luka looked, how he looked physically, how he dealt with some of the, carrying a team with this much of a load. It felt a lot like last year's Mavericks teams at times where they just were undermanned, undersized, didn't have enough athleticism. You're like, okay, what do they have at a certain point? They have 3-point shooting and they have, guys that can move the ball a little bit, but then there's Luka playing his ball. And so now you look forward for Slovenia and you say, okay, well, you have Ziga Samar, who's a young guard that was off the bench. He didn't play in this one. He played sparingly in this run. He's 22. Maybe next year he takes another step forward. They play him a little bit more. That's your chance. And then there's Jan Vide, who's coming up, who's a younger guy for Slovenia that's supposed to be even better than Ziga Samar. But that's your chance going forward for some young talent to play with Luka, because some of these guys, Zoran Dragic is 33, 34. He's aging out. Goran Dragic is obviously aged out of the Slovenia team. And so you've got some of these guys that have played, but then you've got some young talent coming up that I think you can be excited about if you're Slovenia, even though their run ends here. I wouldn't even say their run ends early. This is kind of where they were expected to be at this point. They won all the games they were favored in the tournament run. They lost the game that they were not favored in by 8.5 points. So Slovenia goes down in this FIBA tournament. Canada moves on. You can follow Locked On Raptors for more on that team. They'll be covering Canada. You can follow Locked On Mavs for more. I guess we'll still cover Canada because Dwight Powell is still on there.
Dwight, baby, yeah.
I've been covering those games as as an aside, but I guess we'll cover them now. So there you go, guys. Go subscribe to each individual podcast. Will be all throughout the offseason and 5 days a week, all throughout the season. If you need a show covering your favorite team every day, go follow them. Link in the description. Guys, thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs, Locked On Raptors.